Part 1. The Quiet Cage. The streets outside Isabel Locke's window never seemed to rest. Horses clattered down cobblestone roads, carriage wheels hissed over puddles, and a low fog rolled in from the river, wrapping the city in gray. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistled, a sound that spoke of freedom of movement. But inside her father's fine townhouse on Bedford Square, everything stood still. At 25, Isabel was expected to be what every respectable young woman should be: quiet, polite, and ready to marry. Her father, Colonel James Locke, was a proud man, once a soldier, now a shadow of one. He carried himself like an officer still on parade, every button fastened, every word clipped and final. "Your duty, Isabel," he often said, "is to bring honor to your name, not to fill your head with books." He believed a woman's place was beside a husband, not inside a mind. Isabel Locke had always believed that if God had intended women to be decorative vases, he would have made them considerably less combustible. Unfortunately, her father had missed that particular theological memo. She wasn't empty-headed, not by a long mile. Late at night, after her father had gone to bed, she'd light a candle and read history, law, politics, anything she could get her hands on. She wanted to understand how the world worked and why women were locked out of it. Her friend Margaret Price was the only person who knew. Margaret was daring, all laughter and scandal, with friends in the radical circles of London. One afternoon she whispered, eyes bright with mischief, "Did you know that a woman named Mary and Evans writes novels under a man's name? George Eliot, they call her. And people actually listen to her." Isabel stared. "She writes, and no one knows?" "No one who matters," Margaret said, grinning. "She's made herself free, Isabel. Free to think, to earn, to speak." That word free stayed with her all night. Then her father fell ill. The doctor came and went, bills came and stayed. The family fortune, already thin, began to crumble. One evening, the colonel called her to his room. His face was pale, his voice hard. "You will marry Lord Whitby," Colonel James Locke announced from his sickbed, his weathered face as unyielding as the military campaigns he'd once commanded. "The matter is settled." Isabel stood by the window of their increasingly shabby Bloomsbury townhouse, her delicate fingers gripping the curtain until her knuckles turned white beneath her porcelain skin. At 25, she possessed the kind of beauty that painters attempted and failed to capture: dark auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight, eyes the color of aged whiskey, and a stubborn chin that currently threatened to jut out in mutiny. Father, Lord Whitby, is 53 years old. His last wife died under mysterious circumstances involving a staircase and an unfortunate quantity of sherry. Slander, her father barked, though the coughing fit that followed rather diminished his authority. Henry Whitby is a man of means. We have none. Mathematics, Isabel. Even a woman should understand mathematics. There it was. Even a woman. Isabel had heard variations of this phrase approximately 7,000 times since her mother's death 3 years prior. Before the fever had taken Eleanor Locke, their home had been filled with laughter, books, and the radical notion that Isabel's brain might be good for something besides choosing wallpaper. After, the colonel had retreated into his grief like a hermit crab into a particularly uncomfortable shell, emerging only to remind Isabel of her proper place in the world, which was apparently anywhere she could be quiet and ornamental. "I won't do it," Isabel said quietly. "You have no choice. I've given my word. The banns will be read Sunday." Isabel turned from the window, her jade dress rustling with the movement. She studied her father, this man who had once taught her to fence in secret, who had smuggled her books on law and philosophy, who had loved her mother enough to let her be extraordinary. Illness had hollowed him out, yes, but something else had too. Fear, perhaps. Fear of losing Isabel the way he'd lost Eleanor. Fear that if women were allowed to be anything more than wives and mothers, the entire world might spin off its axis. "Then I suppose," Isabel said carefully, "I should begin preparations." Her father's face softened slightly, relief evident in the lines around his eyes. "Sensible girl. You'll see. Marriage provides protection. Purpose." "Yes, father." Isabel bent to kiss his forehead, noting how his skin felt like old parchment. I'm sure you're right. She was lying, of course. She'd become rather good at it. You must marry Isabel. Before I'm gone, you'll need someone to protect you, he said, almost to himself. That night, Isabel sat by the dying fire, her whole body shaking, not from fear, but fury. Out on the street, she could hear the city, men shouting, working, living their own lives. No one told them who to be. Something inside her snapped. If freedom would never be given to her, she would take it for herself. 3 nights later, Isabel Locke ceased to exist. Oh, the body remained, same whiskey eyes, same unfortunate tendency toward sarcasm, but the trappings of femininity disappeared with brutal effectiveness. Her corset became kindling in the kitchen fire, a liberation so profound she nearly wept. Her auburn hair, which had taken 25 years to grow to her waist, fell in silken ribbons to the floor, courtesy of her mother's dressmaking scissors and a great deal of determination. Standing before her mirror at 2 in the morning, Isabel examined her handiwork. The boy who stared back at her was pale and slight, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that could, with squinting and optimism, pass for masculine. Her father's old clothes hung loose on her frame, but strategic padding and a waistcoat helped matters considerably. Isaac Locke, she told her reflection, lowering her voice to what she hoped was a masculine register. Pleased to make your acquaintance. The effect was somewhat ruined when her voice cracked on acquaintance, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was a convincing gentleman. The letter was the masterstroke, a recommendation from Bartholomew Locke, a fictional uncle conveniently stationed in India, praising young Isaac's keen legal mind and impeccable character. Isabel had practiced her father's military contact's handwriting for weeks and had stolen enough official-looking paper to forge the crown jewels if the mood struck her. She left a note for her father, brief, apologetic, and entirely fabricated about joining a convent. The colonel would be furious, but a daughter in a nunnery was marginally more respectable than one in prison for breach of promise. Lord Whitby would be disappointed to lose his third potential wife, but Isabel suspected he'd survive. Men of his ilk generally did, like cockroaches and tax collectors. As dawn broke over London, Isabel, now Isaac, slipped out of the Bloomsbury townhouse with a single carpet bag, £73 stolen from the household accounts. She'd left an IOU, and absolutely no idea what she was doing. It was terrifying. It was glorious. Her corset-free ribs expanded with possibility. Greaves and Fairchild occupied a distinguished building on Fleet Street, also darkened brick and windows that gleamed with professional respectability. Isaac stood outside for 10 minutes, breathing deeply and occasionally coughing because London air was essentially liquid coal, before gathering the courage to climb the steps. The interiors smelled of leather, wood polish, and the particular mustiness that afflicts legal documents like a chronic condition. A clerk with spectacular mutton chops glanced up from his desk. "Can I help you, young man?" Young man. Isabel's heart performed a small celebration that was entirely inappropriate for the circumstances. "Isaac Locke, here to see Mr. Greaves. I have a letter of introduction." He extended the forged recommendation with a hand that trembled only slightly. Mutton Chops examined the letter with the thoroughness of a man whose entire existence depended on proper documentation. India, you say? Dreadful climate. Wait here." He disappeared up a staircase, leaving Isaac to examine the office. Oil paintings of disapproving men lined the walls, previous partners, presumably, united in their posthumous judgment of the current generation. A young woman, an actual woman, hurried past with an armful of files, and Isaac experienced a pang of solidarity so intense she nearly broke character to mouth, "Run while you can." "Mr. Locke." Mutton Chops had returned. "Mr. Nathaniel Greaves will see you now. 3rd floor, 2nd door." The climb to the 3rd floor gave Isaac time to panic comprehensively. What if her voice betrayed her? What if they demanded references she couldn't provide? What if someone noticed that she walked like a woman because, despite her best efforts, she absolutely did? The 2nd door stood ajar. Isaac knocked, perhaps more forcefully than necessary due to nerves. "Enter." The voice was deep, amused, and entirely unfair. Isaac entered. Later, she would swear that the universe shifted slightly on its axis at that moment, though this was probably just the effect of 3 days of barely eating and the lingering dizziness from cutting off all her hair. Nathaniel Greaves stood behind a mahogany desk that had witnessed more billable hours than most people had heartbeats. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of broad shoulders that suggested he'd missed his calling as a longshoreman or possibly a mythological hero. His hair was dark as November midnight, though silver threaded through it at the temples, suggesting he was perhaps 35. His eyes were gray, the color of Thames fog, and currently studying Isaac with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every false thing about her, the padding, the binding, the very air of masculine confidence she was projecting like a magic lantern show. He was, Isabel thought with a sinking sensation, the most handsome man she had ever seen. This was going to be a problem. Mr. Locke. Nathaniel gestured to a chair. Please sit. Your uncle's letter speaks highly of you. My uncle is generous. Isaac sat, remembering at the last moment to sprawl slightly rather than perch as she'd been taught. Men, she'd observed, treated chairs as suggestions rather than rules. Nathaniel smiled. Good Lord, he had dimples, and returned to his own seat. He suggests you have a keen interest in law and a mind suited to its complexities. Tell me, what attracts you to the profession? This, at least, Isabel could answer honestly. Justice, sir. The idea that reason and argument might triumph over mere force. That wrongs might be righted not with fists but with words. Something flickered in Nathaniel's gray eyes. You're an idealist. Is that a flaw? In a lawyer? Usually fatal. But he smiled again. However, I was once afflicted with the same condition. Some of us survive it. Your handwriting, may I see it? Isaac's pulse jumped. I beg your pardon? Your handwriting. Legal work requires legibility. I once had a clerk whose penmanship was so atrocious we lost a case, because the judge thought our brief was an elaborate practical joke. He pushed paper and pen across the desk. Isabel, Isaac, picked up the pen, careful to hold it as she'd seen her father do, and wrote out a passage from memory. The law is reason free from passion. Aristotle was always safe. Nathaniel examined the sample. Excellent. Clear, efficient. You'll do nicely, Mr. Locke. He extended a hand across the desk. Isaac stared at it for a moment, at the long fingers, the calluses that suggested he did more than push papers, the simple gold ring on his right hand, before shaking it. His grip was warm and firm, and Isabel realized with a start that she'd never shaken hands with anyone before. Ladies didn't shake hands. Ladies touched fingertips like nervous butterflies. This was better. When can you start? Nathaniel asked. Immediately, sir. Eager. I like that. He stood, revealing himself to be even taller than Isabel had feared. He must duck through doorways. Be here Monday, 8 o'clock. The work is demanding, the hours unconscionable, and the pay modest. Still interested? More than you can possibly know, sir. Nathaniel laughed, a rich sound that did unfortunate things to Isabel's composure. We'll see if you maintain that enthusiasm when you've spent 12 hours reviewing property contracts. Welcome to Greaves and Fairchild, Mr. Locke. Isabel, Isaac, floated out of the office on clouds of pure triumph. She had done it. She had a position. She was employed, autonomous, free. She made it to the street before realizing she had absolutely nowhere to live. The problem with triumph, Isabel discovered, was that it didn't pay for lodging. She spent her first night as Isaac Locke in a coaching inn near St. Paul's, in a room that smelled of cabbage and broken dreams. The bed appeared to host a civilization of bedbugs with their own postal system. The gentleman in the next room snored with the enthusiasm of a steam engine attempting opera. But Isabel had never slept better in her life. Sunday, she spent practicing masculine gestures in front of a cracked mirror, the casual leg crossing, the confident stride, the way men seemed to take up exactly twice as much space as necessary. She also practiced her new voice, until the woman in the room below banged on her ceiling with what sounded like a boot. Sorry. Isaac called down in his deepest register. Vocal exercises. Exercise yourself into silence. came the muffled response. Fair point, really. By Monday morning, Isaac had secured modest lodgings in Clerkenwell, a boarding house run by a Mrs. Patterson, a widow with 3 chins and a philosophical approach to her tenants' business. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking a sooty courtyard where pigeons conducted their daily parliament. No women, no gambling, no revolutionary activities, Mrs. Patterson had announced, arms folded across her formidable bosom. I run a respectable establishment. I wouldn't dream of it, ma'am, Isaac had replied honestly. The irony of the first rule was not lost on him, her. At 7:45, Isaac stood outside Greaves and Fairchild, heart hammering against the cloth binding her chest. In daylight, the building looked even more imposing, as if it might audit your moral character as you entered. Early, Nathaniel Greaves emerged from a coffee shop across the street, holding 2 cups. I approve. Coffee? He extended 1 cup, and Isaac accepted it with a gratitude that transcended caffeine. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, just briefly, and Isabel felt an entirely inappropriate flutter that she firmly suppressed. This was employment, not a Gothic novel. Though Nathaniel really was unfairly handsome in morning light. He wore a charcoal suit that must have been tailored by angels, and his cravat was tied with the casual perfection of a man who'd never struggled with such things in his life. A small scar above his left eyebrow suggested an interesting history. Thank you, sir, Isaac managed. Nathaniel, please. Sir, makes me feel ancient. He smiled, those damned dimples appearing. I'm only 36. Ancient adjacent at worst. They climbed to the 3rd floor together, and Nathaniel showed Isaac to a small office adjacent to his own. It was barely larger than a wardrobe, with a desk, a chair, and a window that offered a thrilling view of another building's brick wall. Isabel wanted to weep with joy. You'll begin with the Hutchinson matter, Nathaniel said, depositing a file on the desk that landed with an ominous thud. Property dispute. Riveting stuff. The documents need organizing, and I'll need a summary of the key points by Wednesday. Yes, sir, Nathaniel. Nathaniel paused at the door, studying Isaac with an expression that made her acutely aware of every deception. You seem nervous. First day, Isaac said, which was true if incomplete. Don't be. I have a sense about people, Mr. Locke. You'll do well here. He tapped the doorframe twice, a gesture that would become familiar. And Isaac? If you have questions, ask. There are no stupid questions. The only stupidity is the one that leads to losing a case, because you were too proud to inquire. Then he was gone, leaving Isaac alone with the Hutchinson file and a heart that was doing complicated things. The Hutchinson matter was indeed riveting, in the way that watching paint dry while someone read aloud from a dictionary might be riveting. Mr. Hutchinson and Mr. Pemberton were engaged in a dispute over a fence that may or may not have encroached on Pemberton's property by approximately 4 inches. The correspondence dated back 7 years and could have been used as a cure for insomnia. But Isabel threw herself into it with the fervor of the newly employed. She organized chronologically, then by issue, then by correspondent. She made notes in her clear hand, cross-referenced claims, and by Tuesday afternoon had produced a summary that laid out each party's position with crystalline clarity. Good God, Nathaniel said when she presented it. He looked up from the document, gray eyes wide. Isaac, this is exceptional work. Isabel felt heat rise to her cheeks. Damnation, men didn't blush, did they? Thank you. No, I'm serious. He stood, coming around the desk, and suddenly the office felt very small. He smelled of coffee and something else, something like sandalwood. You've found connections I missed. This argument here, about the surveyor's credentials, this could win the case. It seemed relevant, Isaac said, attempting modesty while simultaneously wanting to dance on the desk. Nathaniel's hand landed on Isaac's shoulder, a gesture of collegial approval that sent an entirely uncollegial sensation down Isabel's spine. I think you and I are going to work very well together. Oh dear, Isabel thought. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. As time went on, Greaves had begun to trust her. They worked side by side long into the evenings, the world outside swallowed by fog. He spoke to her of his ideas, reform, education, the future of England. She listened entranced. He had the air of a man who carried too much responsibility but never lost his kindness. Women in the office found excuses to linger near his desk, and even men respected him instinctively. And Isabel, hidden behind her false name, her false voice admired him more than she dared admit. Every night she returned to her small rented room, unbinding her chest, washing the ink from her hands, whispering her real name to herself like a secret promise. She told herself she could not afford to feel anything for him. But her heart, foolish and free, did not listen. Part 2. The Discovery of Fire. By the end of the first month, Isaac had become indispensable. Nathaniel began requesting his assistance on increasingly complex matters. They fell into a rhythm. Nathaniel would pace while thinking, talking through arguments, and Isaac would listen, occasionally interjecting with observations that made Nathaniel stop mid-stride and stare as if seeing something new and marvelous. "How did you?" he'd begin. "It's obvious," Isaac would reply, though it often wasn't, not even to her. The other clerks, there were 5, all various degrees of young and ambitious, treated Isaac with the casual camaraderie of the professional class. They invited him to lunch, taught him to smoke, a disaster that ended in coughing and public humiliation, and complained about their landlords, their sweethearts, and the persistent unfairness of the universe. Isabel learned to swagger, to spit discreetly, to discuss cricket with the passionate incoherence apparently required of all Englishmen. She learned that men, left to their own devices, were far less mysterious than advertised. They worried about their futures, their families, their thinning hair. They weren't really that different from women, except they could vote and own property and walk down streets after dark without fearing for their safety. Small differences, really. The hardest part was the washing. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house had communal facilities, and Isaac had to wake at dawn to bathe before the other residents stirred. The binding around her chest was uncomfortable, occasionally painful, and had to be adjusted with calculated precision to conceal, without causing actual injury. But these were small prices to pay for freedom. One morning, while sorting through a pile of petitions, Isabel found one from a woman, a widow named Mrs. Emily Cartwright, begging for legal aid after her landlord had seized her home. Women couldn't sue in their own names. Their rights were tied to fathers or husbands. Isabel's hands tightened around the paper. When Greaves passed her desk, she stopped him. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "this case, Mrs. Cartwright, can't she appeal?" Greaves glanced at the letter. "Not directly. The law doesn't allow a woman to act on her own behalf." "That's not fair." "No," he said simply, meeting her eyes. "It isn't." There was something in his tone, not pity, but anger, buried deep and steady. He took the letter from her, skimmed it again, then said, "Come to my office after hours, Locke. Let's see if we can find a way around it." That night, the office was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the scratch of pens. The gas lamps glowed soft gold on Greaves's desk. Isabel stood beside him, watching him think. He rolled up his sleeves as he read through law books, his forearms dusted with ink and chalk. "If we file under her late husband's name," he murmured, "we might have a chance." "You do that?" "For her." He smiled, glancing up. "For justice, Mr. Locke. The law may be blind, but I don't intend to be." She laughed, a small, surprised sound. It slipped out before she could stop it. Greaves's eyes softened. "You have a nice laugh," he said. Then froze, as if he hadn't meant to say that. She stammered, almost forgetting to deepen her voice. Thank you." The room fell into an awkward, then with an awkward clearing of throats, they moved on. Over the following weeks, they worked together more closely. The Cartwright case became their secret project, long evenings of planning, research, and whispered ideas by the firelight. Sometimes, Greaves would bring her tea when he noticed her hands trembling from the cold. Once, he placed a wool scarf around her shoulders without thinking, a simple, kind gesture that left her frozen, breathless, terrified he'd feel the truth beneath her disguise. He didn't. Rumors started in the office, soft laughter, half jokes. Mr. Locke, said one of the senior clerks, smirking, you've caught the partner's fancy. Better not get too clever or he'll adopt you. Isabel smiled awkwardly and said nothing. But the teasing reached Greaves. One evening, when the others had gone, he leaned against her desk. I hope my attention hasn't made things uncomfortable, he said quietly. No, sir, she said quickly. You've been nothing but fair. Still, he said with that faint, disarming smile, you work too hard. Even I go home before midnight. She met his eyes. You go home to something, sir. He paused. And you don't. The question slipped into the air between them like a match into oil. Isabel couldn't answer. She looked away. Greaves watched her for a moment longer, studying her, the slightness of her shoulders, the hesitation in her voice. You're an odd one, Locke, he said softly, though there was no malice in it. There's more to you than you let on. Her pulse thundered. I'm not sure what you mean. He smiled again, a little crooked this time. But I feel like you do. Only I can't figure it out. The problem began in the third month. Isabel realized she was in love with Nathaniel Greaves. Her realization came on a rainy Tuesday. They'd been working late on the Cartwright matter, surrounded by papers and cold coffee. Nathaniel had loosened his cravat, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and was arguing a point with such passion that his hair fell forward into his eyes. The precedent is clear, he insisted, gesturing emphatically enough to knock over an inkwell that Isaac caught with reflexes honed by living in constant fear of discovery. Thank you. The precedent is clear that adverse possession requires. Are you listening? Isabel wasn't listening. She was watching the way candlelight caught the silver in his hair, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the way his whole face transformed with conviction. She was thinking about how he'd brought her tea that morning without being asked, how he'd defended her summary to the senior partner, how he sometimes hummed while reading and didn't seem to know he was doing it. Isaac? Yes, Isabel said quickly. Adverse possession. Continuous use. I'm absolutely listening. Nathaniel's expression softened into something dangerously affectionate. You're tired. Go home. We can finish tomorrow. I'm fine, Isabel protested, but Nathaniel was already helping her into her coat, a gentlemanly gesture that made her throat tight. You work too hard, he said quietly. I don't want to be the kind of employer who grinds his people to dust. You're not, Isabel said, and meant it. You're the best employer anyone could ask for. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face, too quick to identify. Go. Rest. That's an order from your ancient adjacent superior. Isabel went, but she didn't rest. She lay in her narrow bed at Mrs. Patterson's, staring at the ceiling, cataloging all the ways this was a disaster. She was a woman in love with a man who thought she was a man. It was farcical, tragic, completely impossible. Also, potentially illegal? Isabel wasn't entirely sure of the legal status of cross-dressing, but she suspected it wasn't approved. A week later, her secret almost came undone. The Cartwright petition had been sent to court earlier than expected. Isabel, in her hurry, had to deliver the updated brief herself. The courthouse was crowded, men in black coats, powdered wigs, a sea of stern faces. As she crossed the steps, a gust of wind caught her hat and pulled it off her head. Her short hair, just long enough now to curl softly at her neck, spilled free. For a split second, everything stopped. A constable frowned. You there, boy, are you a clerk or a lady? Isabel froze. Her throat closed up. I'm with Greaves and Fairchild, she stammered. Just delivering papers. The constable looked doubtful but waved her on. She hurried inside, heart pounding so hard it made her vision blur. When she returned to the office, Greaves was waiting. Locke, he said quietly, closing the door behind her. The constable at the courthouse asked about you. She went cold. He said you seemed nervous. She laughed nervously. It's because I was running late. He looked at her intensely for a moment, then moved on. Part 3. The Edge of Truth. Spring came late that year. London thawed slowly, the snow turning to slush, the slush to mud, and still the skies stayed pale and gray. Yet inside the offices of Greaves and Fairchild, change was stirring, quiet, unseen, like sunlight beneath clouds. For months now, Isabel had worked side by side with Nathaniel Greaves, helping him prepare cases, writing arguments under his guidance, and learning everything she could. Her handwriting had grown neater, her confidence stronger, and her secret somehow still safe. But lately, she had begun to notice how much more dangerous her heart had become. Every time Greaves leaned close over her shoulder, every time his hand brushed hers as they passed papers across the desk, she felt it, a spark, small but alive. And worse, she thought he might feel it too. One evening, after most clerks had gone, a sudden thunderstorm broke over the city. The office darkened. Rain hammered the windows. Isabel stayed late, finishing correspondence, when Greaves appeared at her desk with 2 cups of tea. "You'll drown in work if you're not careful," he said, smiling. "Then I'll die doing something useful," she said lightly. He chuckled and leaned against the desk beside her. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hair damp from the rain. "I can't decide if you're the most dedicated clerk I've ever met, or the most foolish." "Perhaps both, sir." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "You know, Locke, you've changed this place. The others work harder because of you. You've made me remember why I started this firm, to do good, not just win cases." "That's because you actually care," she said. He looked at her, then really looked. "And you make it easier too." The air between them seemed to hum. His hand rested lightly on the desk near hers, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. The sound of the storm filled the silence. The space between them seemed to get smaller and smaller. The sound of the telephone broke the silence. They both jerked back, Greaves clearing his throat. "I should get that," he murmured. Isabel stood abruptly, gathering her papers. "I should lock up." He didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her as she left. 2 days later, the truth came closer still. A courier arrived at the firm with a sealed letter addressed to Mr. Isaac Locke. Greaves handed it to her absent-mindedly, but when Isabel saw the handwriting, her blood ran cold. It was from Lord Henry Whitby, her would-be fiancé. Greaves noticed her freeze. "Something wrong, Locke?" She forced a smile. "No, sir." But her hands shook as she tucked the letter into her pocket. Later, alone, she tore it open. "Isabel, rumor reaches me that you are in London, living under another name. I will find you. Do not think a woman can hide forever. You belong to your father's promise and to me." Lord Whitby. Her world tilted. He knew. And if Whitby exposed her, it wouldn't just destroy her reputation, it would destroy Greaves's as well. The next morning, she arrived at the office pale and quiet. Greaves noticed immediately. "You're not yourself," he said. "Just tired." He stepped closer. "If you're tired, you can take the day off today." "I don't mind." She smiled softly. "I'm fine, Nathaniel. Thank you for the concern." The crisis came to a head on a Friday evening in October. They were alone in the office, a common occurrence that now felt weighted with significance. Isaac was reviewing a contract, hair falling forward over his forehead. "Isaac," he said abruptly. Isaac looked up. "Yes." Nathaniel stopped. Started again. "I need to say something. It's going to sound, it may damage our working relationship, but I find I can't continue without." He was interrupted by the door banging open. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, silver-haired, distinguished in the way of aging aristocrats who'd been handsome once and hadn't forgiven the universe for time's passage. His eyes, blue and cold as winter seas, swept the office and landed on Isaac. Isaac, who had gone absolutely white. "There you are," Lord Henry Whitby said. "Hello, Isabel." Part 4. Nathaniel's Dilemma. He had told himself it was admiration, that he simply liked the young man's mind, his wit, his courage. But there had been nights, long and silent, when admiration began to feel like something else entirely. There were moments, fleeting, bewildering, when he had found himself watching Isaac's hands as they wrote, or the curve of his mouth when he smiled. And every time it happened, Nathaniel would lock the feeling away, seal it behind logic and duty. He is your clerk. He is a man. It's nothing. It began innocently enough, a growing fondness for his young clerk's company, pleasure in Isaac's quick mind and quicker smile. Nathaniel told himself it was professional appreciation. Mentorship. Perfectly normal. Then came the moment when Isaac laughed at something Nathaniel had said, really laughed, head thrown back and eyes bright, and Nathaniel's heart had performed acrobatics that hearts were not designed to perform. Oh no, he thought. Oh no, oh no, oh no. He was in love with Isaac Locke. His male clerk. His very male, very young, very inappropriate male clerk. Nathaniel prided himself on self-awareness. He was a rational man, a logical man, a man who had been happily, contentedly, occasionally contentedly married to a woman until her death from influenza 10 years prior. He was not the sort of man who developed inappropriate feelings for employees, regardless of their gender. And yet, he found himself noticing things. The delicate bones of Isaac's wrists. The way he bit his lower lip when concentrating. The fact that Isaac smelled nothing like any man Nathaniel had ever encountered, no tobacco, no pomade, just something clean and faintly floral that Nathaniel wanted to identify and bottle and possibly keep in his pocket. "I'm going mad," Nathaniel told his reflection one evening. "This is madness." His reflection offered no solutions. He tried staying away from Isaac, assigning him to work with other solicitors, burying himself in cases that didn't require assistance. This lasted 4 days before Nathaniel found himself inventing reasons to seek Isaac's opinion, to share his lunch, to exist in the same general radius. "You're hovering," the senior partner, Mr. Fairchild, a dried arrangement of a man who specialized in wills, observed. "It's unsettling." "I don't hover," Nathaniel said. "You're hovering over young Locke like a peculiarly anxious bird. Either promote him or leave him be." Nathaniel couldn't do either. Promoting Isaac would mean losing him to independent casework. Leaving him be was apparently beyond his capabilities. It was, he reflected, the most inconvenient thing his heart had ever done. So when Whitby stormed in that day and the truth shattered the air, when Isaac became Isabel, it was as if 1,000 locked doors opened at once inside him. He felt shock, yes. And something else. Something startlingly close to relief. He had not been mistaken about the connection between them. He had simply been mistaken about its shape. Chapter 5: The Unmasking. The air inside Greaves and Fairchild felt too thin to breathe. Nathaniel Greaves stood frozen by his desk, while Isabel, still dressed as Isaac Locke, felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Lord Henry Whitby stepped into the room. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, large, and red-faced, his coat rich with velvet, his arrogance practically dripping from him. He carried a cane more for show than need and wore the smug smile of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "there you are, my runaway bride." The word bride struck the room like thunder. Greaves turned sharply. "You're what?" Whitby ignored him. "Isabel," Whitby repeated, advancing into the office with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything. "Did you really think you could hide indefinitely?" "I have resources, my dear. Investigators. When your father mentioned a fictional convent, I made inquiries. Nuns are surprisingly easy to bribe." "Get out, Isaac," Isabel said, voice shaking. Nathaniel looked between them, his brilliant legal mind struggling to process the information. Isaac. Isabel. Woman. His clerk was a woman. His clerk was a woman, and this odious man was addressing her with proprietary familiarity. "You must be the employer," Whitby said, turning to Nathaniel. "Greaves, is it? I'm afraid you've been harboring my fiancé. Under false pretenses. There are laws about such things." "Fiancé?" Nathaniel's voice came out strangled. "I'm not your fiancé," Isabel said, standing. Without the desk between them, Nathaniel could suddenly see it, the delicate bone structure, the curve of hip that padding didn't quite hide, the features that were beautiful on a man and devastating on a woman. "I never consented. My father had no right." "Your father had every right," Whitby interrupted. "You're his property until you're mine. That's the law, my dear. Now, stop this nonsense. You've embarrassed us both enough." "She's staying here," Nathaniel said. Both Isabel and Whitby turned to stare at him. "I beg your pardon?" Whitby said icily. Nathaniel's mind was racing, legal training asserting itself over emotional chaos. Miss Locke, God, even her name was barely changed. How had he not seen it? Is under my employment. If you wish to contest that, you'll need to do so through proper legal channels. She's a woman, Whitby said, as if explaining to a simpleton. She cannot be employed. It's not legal. Actually, Isabel said quietly, and Nathaniel heard the steel in her voice he'd always admired. There's no law specifically forbidding it. There's precedent against it, tradition against it, but no actual statute. Whitby's face purpled. This is absurd. You, he pointed at Isabel, are coming with me. Now. Or I'll have you arrested for fraud, theft, and whatever else I can think of. Try it, Nathaniel said pleasantly. I'm a rather good lawyer, Lord Whitby. I suspect I can make any case you bring extremely expensive and publicly embarrassing. How will it look, a powerful lord unable to control his young fiancée? The gossip alone would be delicious. Whitby's eyes narrowed. You're making an enemy, Greaves. I collect them. Makes life interesting. For a moment, Nathaniel thought Whitby might resort to physical violence. Instead, the older man smiled, a terrible expression. Very well. The courts, then. I look forward to watching you explain why you employed a woman masquerading as a man. I suspect your professional reputation won't survive it. He left, the door slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. Silence rushed back in. Nathaniel, Isabel said. I can explain. You're a woman. Yes. Named Isabel. Yes. Who disguised herself as a man to work here. Yes. Nathaniel sat down heavily. Then stood up again. Then sat back down. This is. I need a moment to. I'm sorry, Isabel said, and her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I'll resign immediately. I'll leave tonight. I never meant to. Did you do good work? Nathaniel interrupted. Isabel blinked. What? The Hutchinson case. Mrs. Cartwright's case. The arguments you've made over the past months. He looked up at her, Isabel, a woman who was somehow the same person and entirely different simultaneously. Was the work good? Yes. I think so. It was, Nathaniel said. It was brilliant. You're brilliant. He laughed, a slightly unhinged sound. And I thought I was going mad, developing feelings for a man. That's actually much less complicated than I feared. He muttered under his breath. Isabel asked what? Not hearing him. He didn't reply for a beat. The silence that followed was heavy. Isabel stood trembling, unable to meet Greaves's eyes. He moved first. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward her. Isabel, he said softly, testing the name like it was something fragile. Is that truly your name? Yes, she whispered. Isabel Locke. He stopped just in front of her, his expression unreadable. Why? Her throat tightened. Because it was the only way. No one would hire me as a woman. I wanted to work, to learn, to be useful. And I couldn't, not unless I became someone else. Tears burned in her eyes, but she held his gaze. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted a chance. Greaves exhaled, running a hand through his hair. A chance. God, Isabel, you risked everything. I know. He studied her, the face he now saw clearly for the first time, no longer hidden behind shadows and lies. The short hair, the determined eyes, the quiet strength. You're extraordinary, he said finally. She blinked, startled. You're not angry? Oh, I'm angry, he said with a faint, breathless laugh. But not at you. I'm angry that the world forced you into this. That broke her. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Greaves stepped forward instinctively, catching her wrists gently. Isabel, he said, his voice low and firm, look at me. She did. You have nothing to be ashamed of, he said. You've done nothing wrong. You've shown more courage than most men I know. Her tears came freely then, and he let her cry, saying nothing, only standing near enough for her to know she wasn't alone. But when the tears stopped, reality returned. What happens now? She whispered. Greaves looked out the window. Outside, the rain had begun again, washing the city in silver. The truth will spread, he said quietly. Whitby will make sure of it. The firm may suffer. You may be called before the court for impersonation. She swallowed. Then I'll go. You shouldn't have to face the cost of my choices. He turned to her sharply. No. I'll go with you. You can't protect me from this, she said softly. Miss Locke, Isabel, I've spent the last few months watching you work with a dedication and brilliance that puts most men to shame. If our legal system can't accommodate that, then the system needs changing, not you. He smiled. Besides, I'm a very good lawyer. And now, I have the best legal mind I know working with me. I'm a woman, she said. I can't work with you. Watch me argue otherwise. That night, they stayed in the office long after the lamps had burned low. Greaves drafted statements, legal defenses, anything that might shield her from the worst. Isabel sat nearby, silent, watching him work. Finally, she said, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't look up. Because it's right. That's not the only reason. He paused. When he finally lifted his gaze, the look in his eyes made her breath catch. No, he admitted. It's not. He rose slowly and walked toward her, every step careful, deliberate. When he stopped in front of her, he reached out, brushing his thumb over the ink stain on her hand. You've changed everything, Isabel, he said softly. The way I see the law. The way I see people. The way I see myself. Her heart thundered. Nathaniel. He smiled faintly. Say it again. Nathaniel, she whispered. The sound of it, her real voice, her real name, made something in him break open. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You were never meant to be invisible, he said. Not to me. For a moment, the world outside vanished, only rain and candlelight and the closeness between them. I thought I was going mad, developing feelings for a man, he said softly. Isabel stared, heart hammering. Although she had suspected, it was another thing to hear it out loud. Although Nathaniel continued, stepping back and beginning to pace, this presents other problems. You're a woman. I'm your employer. There are power dynamics. Ethical considerations. And Whitby is right, your employment is legally questionable at best. He'll force a court case, and we could lose. No precedent exists for. Nathaniel, Isabel interrupted. What did you say about feelings? He stopped pacing. Looked at her. Really looked at her, Isabel, not Isaac, though the person was the same, wasn't she? Same sharp mind, same terrible sense of humor, same way of tilting her head when thinking. Just female. Which should matter more than it did. I've been falling in love with you for weeks, Nathaniel said. I thought I was falling in love with a man named Isaac, and I was trying to reconcile myself to that revelation. Turns out it's much simpler. I'm falling in love with a woman named Isabel. I'm not sure which terrifies me more. Isabel's eyes, those whiskey-colored eyes he'd admired on a man and now saw on a woman filled with tears. I thought I was alone in this. I thought I was losing my mind. We can both be losing our minds, Nathaniel offered. Traditionally, that's what love is. She laughed, a sound caught between sob and joy. This is a disaster. Professionally? Absolutely catastrophic. He crossed to her, stopping just close enough that propriety hadn't quite been murdered, merely wounded. Personally? I'm finding it less disastrous by the moment. Whitby will take us to court. He'll destroy both our reputations. Then we'd better win, Nathaniel said. And perhaps, in the process, change some laws. By morning, word had spread. Whitby had gone to the papers, and the scandal was on every tongue in London, a lady of birth masquerading as a man of law. The case of Whitby and Locke became the talk of London legal circles within a week. Lord Whitby, claiming breach of promise and seeking to compel Isabel's return as his fiancée, also filed complaints against Greaves and Fairchild for fraud and against Isabel for a truly creative array of charges, including theft of her father's clothes, fraud, the forged letter, and unnatural conduct, which was vague enough to be concerning. Nathaniel Greaves, representing Isabel, filed a countersuit arguing that no valid contract of marriage existed, as Isabel had never consented, and that a woman's right to self-determination superseded paternal authority. Greaves and Fairchild was swarmed by reporters and clients withdrawing their business. The partners called for an emergency meeting. Whispers filled the halls. Greaves stood before them, calm but unbending. "Miss Isabel Locke," he said, "came to us seeking nothing but honest work. Her disguise was wrong, yes, but her reason was just. She wanted to learn, to live, to be equal. If that is a crime, then let us all be guilty." The room buzzed with outrage and disbelief, but Greaves didn't falter. And when he finished, Isabel, standing beside him, dressed in plain clothes, but holding her head high, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in her disguise, not in her fear, but in herself. The trial drew crowds. Every bench was filled. The gallery buzzed with whispers. "That's her, the woman lawyer, the one who tricked them all." Isabel sat at the defendant's table, dressed now in women's clothing, a severe gray dress that Nathaniel had helped her purchase, because apparently they were courting in the least conventional way possible. Her short hair was pinned back as much as possible, though it would take years to grow out properly. She looked terrified. She looked magnificent. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The proceedings began with Lord Whitby himself, standing as the complainant, his pride wrapped in wounded righteousness. "She deceived me, my lord," he declared, his voice loud and performative. "She deceived this firm, the city, and every man who trusted her. Women have their place, and it is not among men of law." Greaves rose slowly. "With respect, my lord," he said, his tone smooth as glass, "what she deceived was not law, it was prejudice. And I, for one, am grateful for the lesson." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whitby's face turned crimson. "Are you implying she was right to break the law?" Greaves smiled faintly. "I am suggesting the law might be wrong to break her." The judge lifted a hand for silence. "Enough. Let us hear from the accused herself." Isabel stood, every eye in the room burning into her. Her knees wobbled, but Greaves's steady gaze anchored her. "My lord," she began, her voice clear but quiet. "I was born in a world where a woman's mind was considered a decoration, not a tool. Where her duty was to marry, bear children, and die before her spirit had a chance to breathe." A murmur spread through the gallery. She continued, gaining strength. "I wanted more. I wanted to learn, to work, to serve truth. But when I knocked on every door, they were locked. So I did what any desperate soul might do, I found another key." She paused. "If that was a crime, then I am guilty. But I ask you to see the reason, not the rebellion. I did not wish to steal a man's place, only to prove that I could earn one." Silence followed. Even the judge looked thoughtful. Whitby scoffed loudly. "Fine words. But what she did undermines the very foundation of society." Greaves turned toward him, his expression sharpened. "Then perhaps the foundation deserves a few cracks." The courtroom erupted, half in laughter, half in outrage. The judge rapped his gavel. "Order! Order, I say!" After hours of debate, the verdict was delivered. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Locke, your actions were indeed unlawful, but not malicious. The court will issue a formal censure, but no imprisonment." Gasps again, and then applause from the gallery. "Furthermore," Davies continued, raising his voice, "we wish to state for the record that we see no reason why a woman of sound mind and good character should be prevented from honest employment. The defendant has demonstrated capability. That should be sufficient." Whitby was on his feet, face purple. "This is outrageous." The law, Judge Pemberton said, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "is what this court declares it to be. And this court declares that Miss Isabel Locke has the right to self-determination, including the right to work, and that no valid marriage contract exists between the parties." He paused, looking out at the packed gallery. "Furthermore, I am recommending to Parliament that legislation be drafted to clarify women's rights to employment and self-determination. It is past time." He brought down his gavel. "Court is adjourned." Isabel's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Beside her, Greaves exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Whitby, fuming, rose from his seat and stormed out. As the crowd broke into murmurs of excitement and approval, Greaves turned to Isabel. "It's over," he said softly. She shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, Nathaniel. It's only the beginning. Outside, in the December cold, Isabel stood on the courthouse steps and breathed. "We won," she said, not quite believing it. "You won," Nathaniel corrected. "I just argued. You changed minds." Around them, chaos continued. Reporters shouted questions. Suffragettes who'd packed the gallery cheered. Lord Whitby stormed to his carriage, likely to spend the rest of his life boring dinner parties with this story. "What happens now?" Isabel asked. Nathaniel considered. "Well, you're still employed at Greaves and Fairchild, assuming you want to be. We've established legal precedent for that, at least. You'll face opposition from clients, from other solicitors, from society in general. It won't be easy." "I never expected easy," Isabel said. "I expected possible." "Then there's the matter of us," Nathaniel continued. "I'm still your employer, which creates complications. But I'm also, apparently, hopelessly in love with you, which creates different complications. We could keep things professional." "We could." Isabel kissed him. It was not a particularly good kiss. She had no experience. He was surprised, and they were on the courthouse steps in front of approximately 70 witnesses. But it was enthusiastic and sincere, and when they broke apart, Nathaniel was smiling. "Or we could do that," he said. "I'm still not very good at being a woman," Isabel warned. "I like working. I hate embroidery. I'll probably never be decorative or obedient or any of the things women are supposed to be." "Good," Nathaniel said. "I'm not very good at being a proper gentleman. I prefer clever women to conventional ones. I think the legal system needs overturning, and I'm about to be a social pariah for employing a female clerk and courting her simultaneously." He took her hand, properly now, no pretense of masculine handshakes. "Shall we be improper together?" "I'd like that," Isabel said. Behind them, someone from the gallery shouted, "3 cheers for Miss Locke." The cheers echoed through Fleet Street, scattering pigeons and rattling windows and suggesting that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was tilting towards something better. In the weeks that followed, London changed in small but powerful ways. Pamphlets began to appear on the rights of women to work. Meetings were held in drawing rooms and libraries. Men and women alike began speaking of the Locke affair as a turning point. Epilogue, 6 months later. The Women's Employment Act passed Parliament in June of 1886, with much grumbling and dire predictions about the collapse of civilization. Civilization, stubbornly, continued. Isabel Locke became the first woman formally admitted to practice law in England, though she had to fight for every client and every case. Some she won. Some she lost. All of them mattered. Nathaniel Greaves married Isabel in a small ceremony that scandalized his mother and delighted everyone else. They argued cases together, disagreed about legal theory, and generally drove each other to distraction in the way of people who are perfectly matched. Colonel James Locke, recovered from his illness, attended the wedding. He and Isabel had reached a tentative peace, built on mutual stubbornness and the recognition that love sometimes means letting people be extraordinary. "Your mother would be proud," he told Isabel before walking her down the aisle. "I know," Isabel said, and meant it. Lord Whitby moved to the countryside, where he could bore rural society with his tales of the woman who got away. He married again, eventually, a woman appropriately decorative and obedient who secretly ran his entire estate while he believed himself to be in charge. Everyone was happy. Mrs. Patterson, upon learning that her respectable young tenant, Mr. Locke, had been a woman all along, laughed until she wept. "I knew something was off," she claimed, though she absolutely hadn't. "No man is that tidy." The law firm became Greaves, Fairchild, and Locke. And on quiet evenings, when the cases were filed and the arguments were rested, Nathaniel and Isabel would sit in their study, both working, both reading, both exactly as they were meant to be. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked once. "All the fighting? The scandal?" Isabel looked up from her brief, smiled, and returned to her work. "Not for a moment."